Okay, so in case you have missed it somehow, this is the talk of the Runeterra world at the moment. Last night, Legends of Runeterra tweeted out that they will be doing a hotfix patch this week for a couple of nerfs so that the World Championship meta isn't stale. Hooray, 3 days of testing. So, the nerfs as they stand. Shapestone is going from +3/+1 to +2/+1. Merciless Hunter is going to 2 HP. Rune Runner is going to 3 HP. Flawless Duet is going to 2 mana. And Flurry of Fists is going to 4 mana. So, if we look at this totally accurate patch 2.4 straight on the money tier list that I made Friday, 2 days after the set came out, I've removed Sivir Akshan Demacia, Azir Aurelia, and Sivir Akshan Ionia from it to give you an idea of what the meta would look like if these decks just magically disappeared. Now, the decks aren't necessarily dead. I am going to be making this video operating under the assumption that they are because I don't know what their relative power level is anymore. So I'm going to pretend that they just don't exist and nobody is going to bring them to the tournament when I talk about how this impacts the meta. There's a couple different philosophies that you can take when removing top dogs from the meta, and the one that I initially took was sort of the top-down strategy of, okay, well, what's the next best deck? And the answer seems to be Draven Scion. That's indicative of both its Week 1 performance on ladder, as well as its performance in the opening tournament weekend, where it did tie with Sivir Demacia in terms of its presence in the top 8 of the Online League Series, and then just fell short of it overall in the tournaments when we added in the Runeterra Showdown number 2. And if that is the case, then Draven Scion becomes the new focal point. You probably don't have to change too much about your lineup. You'll still have Draven Scion in it. You'll still have probably whatever your third deck was, because your strategy was to ban Sivir Demacia, so it disappearing from the meta doesn't impact your lineup in the sense that you have to totally scrap it and start from scratch, right? You probably still have 1, maybe even 2 playable decks, but I don't think that's going to be the case. Instead, I think Control gets a massive boost because the Sivir decks played unlike any other deck in Runeterra. They had access to more spell shields than you would see in any other kind of deck, and that really hurt Control's chances. Now, Control was already really well positioned at the Rise of the Underworld Seasonal. Had it not been for Cameron Hanzo running into Aikado in Top Cut, running into this really weird anti-Control lineup that Aikado brought, I think Cameron Hanzo very well might have won the Seasonal. So I think that it makes sense that triple Control now becomes the standard, with not only Sivir Akshan falling to the wayside, but also Azir Aurelia, which was a big sort of pressure point for Control decks. You really didn't have answers for that, and I think that Shapestone nerfs as well as the Blade Dance nerf is enough to have Control at least be even or favored against the new Azir Aurelia, as well as really just dissuade anybody from bringing the deck in general, which I think is the more important one, right? We could argue till the cows come home about whether or not Azir Aurelia is still a playable deck, but I don't think anybody is going to bring it in the qualifier rounds. And that means your triple Control gets through. That means your Spooky Viego, your Darkness, Deep is probably good as well. Deep usually does okay into things like this. Lee Sin comes back, Anivia comes back, Thralls come back, because they tend to do well into Control because of how fast they are and hard to interact with for Control decks. What also comes up pretty big is Bandletree. Now, Bandletree wasn't on the tier list to begin with. Now that it's gotten a little bit more refined, and we've figured out its place in the meta, I think that it has a good Draven Scion matchup, and I think the stats agree with that. It's mostly just because they're really good at mucking up the board in a way that Draven Scion struggles to get through, because there's actually not that much overwhelm in the deck. And of course, if they need to, they can run mini more for the Draven Scion matchup. But now, with Sivir Akshan and Azir Aurelia out of the way, you're also free to just ban the Draven Scion, and then anything with a landmark win condition is usually going to be pretty good against Control decks. So that's where Bandletree might actually be able to pop up as like a tier 2, tier 1 choice all of a sudden, as well as Control moving up the ladder very heavily. Lee Sin is in a bit of a weird spot, right? Because Lee Sin was a little bit held down by Sivir decks. It doesn't have a good Sivir matchup, but if Control moves up, that means Minimorph is moving up as well, because Darkness is probably going to be one of the premier Control decks. It is a little bit weird though, right? Because Darkness Control doesn't usually actually do very well into Control mirrors, because it is hard to cast the Darkness, and you're a lot more susceptible to Ruination than some of these other decks are. Darkness Control actually plays a lot like Spooky Viego, right? Where you're sort of this unit-based Control deck, unlike something like Anivia or Karma Ezreal, where you play very few units. So I think that's where we're going to start to have the meta sort of converge, and that's what the new standard is going to become, right? Is like, who can outlate game the other on these Control decks? Where does combo fit into things? Bandletree is probably just a very solid choice, and Scout's probably going to do okay as well, because we were already moving into this very solid Stony suppressor style of scouts, which tends to do very well against control, very good at outpacing it. Aggro is a bit of a question mark. It actually has a good chance at slipping through the cracks, because if everybody expects a bunch of control mirrors, they're playing much greedier. They're cutting down on Withering Whales and things like that because, hey, you know, it doesn't do very well in the control mirror. Go Hard is a prime example of this. While editing this, I actually wanted to pop in because I knew what I was thinking of, and it wasn't Go Hard, it was Nasus. If you ran Withering Whale in your Nasus deck, you did very well in the Nasus mirror, but you did absolutely nothing against Dragons and Lysandra. That's what I was thinking of. But now, we're going to run into a similar thing, right? And if you're running the super greedy control lineup to beat all of the other control decks, then you have probably gone a little bit too over the edge, and you are actually going to lose to aggro. So this does open up the meta a lot more than I kind of initially expected it to, but I think that it is going to be very control-focused, and that's what we should be looking at. Now, this is just part 1 of Tournament Tactician. I just wanted to kind of get my thoughts out day 1, just my reactions to the patch and how I thought that was going to shake up the meta, in order to give you some guidance on your testing if you were just totally lost in this. So that's where I think things are going to go. Some of the question marks are, how does Nami play into control? How does Draven Caitlyn fit into control? Do we still have, I mean, generally Draven Ezreal wasn't like super good into control. It was like a great anti-mid-range thing, but maybe we ramp up the aggression a little bit of the decks. Maybe we play a little bit more burn, Captain Farron, I don't know, things like that. But that's kind of where I think you should be testing, is against control lineups. I think that is going to be the new focal point of the tournament meta. I could be wrong. If you disagree, totally fine. Please test according to what you believe. Just know that this is how I think things are going to shake out. So, thank you so much for watching. My name is Boulevard. I will be back tomorrow, maybe Thursday morning, with another Tournament Tactician to actually go over the new tier list after I've jammed some games, taken my theories to the ladder into scrims, and let you know how it all shakes out. So thank you so much for watching. My name is Boulevard, and as always, good luck in your tournaments.